I'll say it more broadly because this is a concept I've thought about a lot. And if I ever did write a book, it'd be something like this. Put a gun to anyone's head in the country. I don't care how big, slow, whatever, and say, move your body 26.2 miles or I'm blowing your head off. Like, you're going to get a lot of people running marathons.
Yeah. Welcome to the Founder's Journey podcast. I'm Greg Moran.
I'm Peter Dean. We're founders who struggle the same way every other founder does.
Our goal is to let founders tell their own stories, the successes and the setbacks, the good stuff and the not so good stuff, sharing what it means to go on this entrepreneurial journey.
This is part inspiration, part knowledge and learnings from everyday founders to make your journey a bit easier.
Welcome back to the Founder's Journey podcast. Greg Moran here with my esteemed co-host, Peter Dean.
How's it going?
Good. We've got a guest today that's going to make us all feel lazy because of what he's done with his life. Certainly an inspiration, gotten to know really well over the past few years. So this is going to be a fun interview with a super interesting guy. Wanted to welcome Demian Costa to the podcast. Hey, Demian.
How we doing?
Good. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to give my explanation, my quick background of Demian. And full disclosure, Demian and I are actually partners in a company that we're working on right now called Conquer, which is a super interesting software company in the sales enablement space. But Demian's background before Conquer, kind of working backwards, was running the family office for the founder of probably one of the, and I'll let Demian tell the story, but probably one of the best known brands in the world, and running the private investments of that individual with a firm called Sagamore Ventures, has run businesses like whiskey companies. I think there's a salad dressing stuck in there somewhere. And even before that, Demian was a member of the U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6, is what we call the lay people of the world. But Demian said that's not actually. So Demian, what's the right name for Navy SEAL Team 6?
Well, I think it's a great question. There's a media reality that is pre and post bin Laden getting killed. I think prior to that event, you would never have heard those words mentioned in the public with any frequency. It was a very sensitive name for a command that didn't exist, right? And so coming up in the ranks of the SEAL teams, and to be fair, I spent nearly 12 years in the Navy, and only the last kind of quarter of that or third of that was the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. That's how I refer to the command. And if someone wants to refer to it differently, you can Google or do your thing.
So Navy Special Warfare Development Group, and the abbreviation for that is DevGru, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. It's a different place with a different path to going there. We like to kind of keep that chapter or that command. I like to kind of keep them a little bit insulated from the public eye as best we can. And look, at the end of the day, a lot of what we all should be concerned about with operational security or OPSEC is that you've got people out there, obviously protecting the country and doing great things, not just in the military, but the law enforcement agencies, things like that. You just want to be very, very careful that we don't lead people down paths to where they can find too much stuff about what these folks are or where they are or things like that. Yeah. So, but with that said, I mean, I think that there's definitely been enough spoken about in the public eye. I mean, right before this, I just was curious. It'd been a while since I Googled those words, and I did, and there was, there's a Wikipedia page, and there's all this stuff. So the 8 people that don't know, but
what's interesting, I think, is you joked about like the 8 people who don't know, right? Well, one of the reasons that people know that name is so many people have gotten out of those elite forces, whether it's the SEALs or others, and really built careers, continuing to tell that story, right? And I know that's something that you've kind of had an opinion on, but it's also not a direction that you really chose to go. This, I think, is actually the first time you're really kind of telling the story sort of publicly, to whatever extent this podcast is actually publicly.
You're safe.
Right.
We probably have 8 people, and hopefully those people are the ones that did know.
But I think, Greg, look, and first of all, it's been great working with you for the last gosh, we're 6, 9 months now. We're doing some good stuff together, and it's super fun. And we can get into that later. But you kind of your opening question there, your opening volley is an interesting one. Like, why is this the first time I've really come out and talked, about that part of my life? I do remember one time I talked to like some seventh graders or sixth graders, and I had some pictures. It was like, uh, someone had asked me. It was like a troubled class and that sort of thing. So it was something that bordered on like scared straight.
If you don't straighten yourself out, you're gonna end up just like me. Was that the lesson?
Unfortunate situation. There's a lot of reasons, right? And one, I think I'm not ashamed to say I'm 47 and a half years old. I have a 1.5-year-old and a 5-year-old, near almost 5-year-old. And so I waited a while before I took that journey to have kids. And I think it was that moment where you start to that and getting older, you start to sort of reconcile with these different parts of your life. And as I started to get older and reach this point in my career as well, where I'm not as focused on kind of the next. Let me just quickly get to the next thing, but I'm really kind of looking back and in retrospect, trying to understand how all the stuff that I've done have led to this moment. Because I'm getting to an age where, we all start to think about more about what's like the next chapter, like doing less versus how do I keep doing more. And in that exercise, I had to make peace with this nearly 12-year chapter of my life. And so how I talk about that with my kids, what does it mean to me? How did it influence where I am today? It's kind of what we're talking about.
Mhm.
Honestly, there's probably a lot of reasons. I can't put my finger on one thing and say, there was something that happened, and as a result, I don't talk about my experience in SEAL team. It's not that. It probably, if anything, was I needed to establish myself as something other than that. Right. I mean, if you guys can imagine, and it's gotten out of control these last 15 years, but it's probably the equivalent of playing for some very famous professional sports team. And like you walk out of that stadium into that crowd, and like everywhere you go, when people ask you what you do, you're like, I mean, maybe SEAL. I mean, it's like, it's pretty cool. Right. So,
Yeah.
And so when you leave that identity and you have to go establish a new identity, you can do that, but you need to really focus on establishing a new identity. And I think I have absolutely just for the record, I have no issues with anybody writing anything about their time or promoting themselves in that way. I'm not one of those people who believes that you shouldn't talk about it or you shouldn't be successful based on that. I just don't believe it. I think that I've always said it this way. I've never heard anybody criticize a general or an admiral for writing a memoir or a book. And I've heard plenty of people criticize an E5 or an E6. And I think it's completely unfair, especially if they go through the proper channels and get proper approvals from the Pentagon, then they have every right to write a book. Anyway. And so I just, I wanted a very, very clean and clear break between the accomplishments of the first 12 years of my life and then now the accomplishments of, the next sort of chapters of my life. And that's probably it.
You made this transition, right? You went from you're the NFL, the Major League Baseball, the Premier League of the military, right? And then you make this transition into the business world. I mean, talk about that a little bit. Like, what made you kind of say, "Hey, I'm going to start down this path"? Because you immediately, I think,
as a founder,
right, came
right?
out as a founder, right, and started.
And
What was the journey there? What was kind of the impetus behind that?
So I think if you haven't noticed, the world hasn't noticed it, the most entrepreneurial group in the military, for better or worse, are definitely the U.S. Navy SEAL teams. I mean, these cats we're entrepreneurial through and through, whether it's thinking through how to use gear, change gear, find ways to do things. We're an entrepreneurial bunch. And we're not big on a long-term planning, the kind of things that you would see in that big structured corporate environment.
Mhm.
When I got out, it was important for me to go, like I said, and do something completely different. But the choices that I had at the time were go work for a contractor. And by the way, do the exact same thing for a little bit more money, but nowhere near as cool.
You're talking
Uh,
military contractor, right? You're not
right.
talking contractor going out building buildings. You're talking about privatized military stuff.
You can show right back up into those places you're not in the news, but getting paid by the day, um, a day late, and I'm doing some of the things that we didn't really want to do. So you could do that, and those jobs were wide open. It was pick up the phone and you're on a plane, fast as you want to be on a plane, making money. The second thing would be to take some sort of government job in the same vein. But when you think about those two things, it's kind of like, why would I leave the coolest job in the entire world? It's like, why would I leave playing for the Dallas Cowboys to go, like, no offense, like work at some high school football? You know what I mean? It's just, you just kind of want to do the next thing. And so that kind of left me with, well, I could go get a job in a big corporate world. And it just was, I don't know. I didn't feel right. Starting at the bottom again, working my way. I was 30. I had all this experience. I didn't want to go to some management training program. So I had this opportunity to start a company with my brother. That was crazy. So it was crazy. So you want to talk about like culture shock? Imagine, if you will, working with people who, well, one, they can't get fired, but two, these are the most highly screened humans on the planet. You're screened to be a SEAL, and then screened again to get to the thing where I was. And I mean, I was the worst in this group as far as like accountability and everything else. I was a little bit of a wise guy. So when you go from that to the service industry, like, hey, I remember my brother was my partner. I'm like, this person didn't show up. We're just going to fire him. He's like, well, they have a book of business that's like, this big. Like, we can't fire him. And they just gave us a middle finger. Now looking back, you imagine your top sales producer, right? And you're like, that guy's a jerk. That girl's a jerk. Like, man, I know. So, I'm like, wow, this is going to be really, really hard to manage, like the service industry.
Yeah.
I lasted, better part of, I guess, 6-7 years doing that with my brother.
Mm-hmm.
But boy,
that was a fitness business, right?
A fitness wellness. We were pretty early into the wellness game, and we had built a few physical locations. But what we found was building programs for corporations. This is important to the next chapter of my life, but
yep.
Building programs and then tying those programs into the benefits for companies that are, self-insured was way more scalable than leasing space and leasing, like doing that whole game.
Totally.
So, and our focus is always programmatic. Like, we wanted to have, humans that could deliver great content and great training to affect real change for people versus the puppy mill model of like, let me open up this cheap box and like watch people go up in January, then pray and it'll come back, right, for the rest of the year if it's like them in January. So, we did something completely opposite and try to focus on, first these individuals that really wanted to affect change in their life in a positive way and on the health side. And then going into companies, and this is in like 2006 when Biggest Loser and smoking cessation programs were wellness, right? So, and one of those companies, fortunately was Under Armour. I got to know the founder very, very well. We became super close friends, and that led, directly my next role after that. I had a quick stop in business school to get my MBA in there, but once I got that, then I went and joined the next thing. So
the really interesting part of this is the correlation, right, between those characteristics of successful founders and where you were, prior to that. And I think because there's been a lot written about that kind of thing, right? Is this sort of, Navy SEAL mindset, whatever. But before we get there, talk about that experience with Kevin. I know you and I we've talked about this a bunch, and I mean, to say it was a varied bunch of industries, would be the understatement of the century.
Yes. Thank God software was in there somewhere. I probably would have had for Conquer. I still kind of do. Yeah. It was an interesting time. I had an initial early conversation with Kevin, and before there was a semblance of an office, we spent time talking through some of these ideas that he had. They were really, really cool ideas to build these next kind of cool, iconic companies that had a Maryland tie and could create jobs in Maryland. It'd be great for Maryland.
So just to be clear, this is Kevin Plank, who's the founder of Under Armour, who's based in Baltimore.
I should back up and just say that like I left the startup world, and got my MBA, and then I went to join Kevin Plank, the founder, CEO at the time of Under Armour, NYSE UA, keep it all in there. And yeah, it was fun, man. When I joined full time, there was an early, very, very early stage spirits business that became Sagamore Spirit. He had someone running that. Just to be clear, I never ran Sagamore Spirit. He had a great guy running that. I did help him early on with things like, hey, how many trucks are gonna be needed to come and pick up slop from the production and the grain? Like we were working through a lot of these sort of process things that you do, with those problems you do in your business school, right? So, and budgets and forecasting and all that stuff. So there was that business unit was in its infancy, but just starting. And this is 2013 when I joined. So there was that. He had a great guy running his life at this point, managing his overall sort of portfolio and health. And he asked me to come on to really do a couple of things. One, he was trying to think about how he was going to invest in startups and companies kind of outside of the Under Armour ecosystem. He's an entrepreneur at heart, and he absolutely adores that space and he just wants to be involved. He's got his blood. And I think, the time we were thinking about is we could add a ton of value, right? You got one of the most brilliant brand builders in the world, right? And we could do a lot. And as we started to kind of migrate over the next few years, it really took on. We were located in Baltimore. We found that we had a passion for the city of Baltimore and making it a better place to work, live, play. So we wanted our investments to reflect that and help that initiative, which pros and cons. So anyway, I get in there, and right away I was charged with, okay, figure out how we're going to participate in this private equity venture capital investment space. Oh, and I got this whiskey business, and I'm about to start this real estate thing. A few people in there, they could use like an MBA running around with budgets and Excel spreadsheets and stuff. So go and do that. And I said, roger that, let's do it. So there I am. Now I've gone, this military career. I had a fun time in the startup world managing that. And now I'm in this, this billionaire's family office in the very beginning. And it was a wild ride up to this point. I can pause there or can keep rolling.
Until you met Greg, and then
yeah, right.
Like, where have I been my whole life? Yeah. So it was so
That's
much
cool.
fun, man. So much fun. And I remember there was this moment from 2012, 2013 to 2016, 2017, where the Under Armour stock was just on a tear. They were getting into the digital space. I was meeting all kinds of amazing people that were in that space through these acquisitions that the company had made. And it just seemed like we could do no wrong. And we were getting deeper and deeper and deeper into these other investments that we were making. And it was crazy. And some of the things that I look back and we accomplished, I mean, like when you go through Port Covington, now Baltimore Peninsula, in the city today, and you see what was built. I mean, when that was an abandoned rail yard, it does kind of take your breath away a little bit, right? Like you go, holy mackerel, we just like transformed this peninsula. It was a crazy, crazy time. I had a blast. I learned a ton. We invested in all kinds of stuff, but more importantly, we looked at and did invest in literally thousands of deals. And I wish I had a focus, but it was imagine everything that someone who knew someone who knew someone that knew Kevin Plank could get in front of this guy. It routed right to me. I mean, spirits businesses, movie scripts, hair products, like.
I mean, I think just seeing the diversity probably helps you with what you're doing today, because like there's so many things that translate over that if you just did software or whatever one industry, you're not going to even learn what you learned from seeing all of those different things.
Thanks for saying that, Peter. I couldn't have said it better myself. Right. And it made me what I like to call a mile wide and hopefully more than a foot deep, maybe 2 feet deep. But I'm definitely a jack of all trades, master of none, versus having this sort of very specific sector focus. Right? And if I could tell you how many share purchase agreements I read, wrote bunch, did debt deals, did convertible notes, did lead stuff, followed the stuff. We were just all over the place until things, kind of took their inevitable. There was a bit of a contraction there, obviously, and now I think Under Armour stock coming back down is any surprise to anybody. It had a very strong impact on the family office. When you go ride this huge wave and you come back down, the first people to get scrutinized are like the ones who are distracting, the founder, right? So we started playing a different game, 2016, 2017. Yeah.
When you look at this, Damian, I mean, you've had this interesting career, right? Where you've worked with probably some of the best founders in the world, right? Some of the best entrepreneurs in the world, building iconic brands like Under Armour. And you've seen it on the other side, and these individuals like yourself who have reached this absolute pinnacle of the military. When you think about that, like what are the common denominators that you see? When you think about like those behavioral characteristics that get somebody up to the top of the SEALs, right? Or you look at where Delta Force or whatever, whoever it is, and you look at those attributes that make somebody like Kevin or other founders that are of that sort of stature, right? What are those? What are the common characteristics? Where do the parallels really exist?
I think the number one thing is the belief that you can do it in the face of unrelenting adversity, right? And I'd say, more so when as I knew Kevin, his background, how he started the company. You want to talk about overcoming obstacles, man. Like, the belief that you're just going to find a way. He used to say that all the time. Find a way. Just find a way. That always resonated with me the most because that's the core of what being a SEAL is. Back to basic underwater demolition SEAL training, BUDS, for the 7 people that don't know what that stands for now. But so when you think about what BUDS training is, right? One, it's super long. This military training is it's the longest. It's longer than our special forces training. It's long. And it's long in the sense that it is unrelentingly brutal and hard for the entire time. At no point does it ever become a gentleman's course until you get out, right? I love to tell people I started my BUDS class 209 with 164 people, 20 officers, 144 enlisted. At the end, we had 9 enlisted and 11 officers of that original group that started. It's not because, and I had professional triathletes, like Olympic swimmers. I had like nobody is from the Midwest that had learned how to swim and they made it. And like they learned to swim after boot camp. Like there was no rhyme or reason to it. It's just this, you have to acquire along the way the idea that whatever you're being presented with, like you can do it, And so I'll say it more broadly because this is a concept I've thought about a lot. And if I ever did write a book, it'd be something like this. Put a gun to anyone's head in the country. I don't care how big, slow, whatever, and say, move your body 26.2 miles or I'm blowing your head off. Like you're going to get a lot of people running marathons.
Yeah.
And they would get done and they would be like, holy mackerel. All right. I completed a marathon. I think about like, Oprah Winfrey back in the day running a marathon. Like what would happen to her 2-3 years later? Her car breaks down the side of the road, 20 miles to the next exit, middle of nowhere, doesn't have any help. What would go through her head if she was like, I got to get 20 miles to get gas? Is she going to be like, I'm done? No way I'll do that. No, she'd be like, I ran 26.2 miles. I'll be fine. Take it slow, So when BUDS did was it pushes you so far beyond what you ever thought was physically possible. Do it consistently across everybody. And look, a lot of people, there's a lot of reasons why there were 9 and 11 at the end of my class. And most of them weren't people quitting. I mean, a lot of people quit for sure, but it's, your knee didn't hold up, your back didn't hold up. Like something bad happened and you got injured and you just never could quite recover. And then they rolled you out for too long. And then you kind of lost interest. There's a lot of reasons, but man, for the folks that you get through and you're like, there's no way I'm going to fail at doing this. Right. And it just gets instilled in your hard drive deep back in there. And I've seen that in the people who, look, I've met a ton of successful founders, obviously Greg and Peter, you guys. And how many times have you guys done where you're sitting around going like, oh man, we're about to go under? Like, oh. And then I pulled this little, out of nowhere and got this contract and that turned the whole thing around, And so like those stories are all over the startup and entrepreneurial world, founders world. And it's the people who get to that point and they're like, I think I can do it. We'll do one more try. So,
Peter and I joke, we've joked like for years about the fact that the only difference between us and guys who went out of business entirely is we were actually too dumb to realize that we had gone out of business. Just nobody told us. Like everybody else knew we had failed. Nobody actually communicated that to us. So we just kept showing up. Next day we showed up to work.
Let's go.
That's right.
I'm still fighting.
That's
They're like, with what?
Right.
You have nothing left.
I think you're right. I think, it is that level of, resilience, right? I think that adaptability that becomes so key to that founder's journey, right? As in the same way that we see all the time when so often founders, I think, get to that stage and you just start to overthink these things, right? You just start to overthink, what am I going to do? Right? How do I solve this? How do I fix this problem? When really the answer is just show up again. You don't
just keep going.
You don't have to know that answer. You just have to not show up, right? And somehow let that answer start to present itself kind of organically, right? It's when you sit there and you start to think these things, try to analyze this stuff to death, that it's like, no, you can't get out of your own way at that point.
You can have like the smartest, most trained engineer or the biggest expert in your space, and some idiot like us will show up and then we'll survive. And we maybe didn't know half the stuff when you started it, and half the time I started businesses, I had no business doing at all. Like I didn't know the industry. I didn't know what I was doing. Like you look back and you're like, I had no business. No wonder people treated me like that. I got a chip in my shoulder. I'm like, I'm just going to show you that I do it. And half the time I'm doing it for that.
As you're talking, I mean, there's so many parallels. I remember when I was, in buds, I'm a young kid, 20. And I mean, everybody is like, this sucks. I don't know. I got better things I can do. But yeah, I mean, you always just say, I want to show up tomorrow morning and then I'll figure it out from there. Right. I'll just show up tomorrow morning. Right. Many years ago, one of the first events that I ever got asked to go to as a civilian charity event working stiff. I put my one suit on. I go to this naval. It was like a Special Operations Warrior Foundation or something. Anyway, it was a charity event, and they give it was a great initiative, and they gave money to the children of anyone fallen that had fallen in the service in the line of duty. Went to college, and so I go to this thing, and I'm sat at this table with a young kid who had a very famous older brother in the SEAL teams. I'll just leave it at that. And he was, headed into SEAL training himself, and he had a sponsor with him who was a very accomplished SEAL and had just gotten out. And at the end of the dinner, there's 10 of us at this table, and they asked me, "Hey, what advice do you have for this young guy who's about to go to Buds?" And I said, the biggest thing that you're going to struggle with, man, is thinking too far ahead. You got your brother in your mind, and he was killed. He was killed in one of the more famous stories, but and you're going to be thinking about what team you're trying to get to, and I go, dude, it's just going to kill you. Like, you gotta focus on just show up the next day. You start thinking about where you're going to get assigned, and like you start overthinking it. Then I learned, soon after he didn't make it through. So, which is really unfortunate. But I tell you, it's hard, right? Like I saw it with the kids that came through with really famous generals and admirals for fathers,
Mhm.
right? They get so wrapped up in the complexity down the road. I was too stupid. I'm like, I don't just what if I show up tomorrow and kick me
Still here.
go here? Yeah, it's super super interesting.
What you just described is advice you could give to a founder, a first founder,
Yeah,
like just thinking, oh, what am I going to do with exit? How much money are we going to make? I said, dude, yeah, like they get wound up in cap tables and like
yeah,
get all twisted over 2%. And they're like, yeah, but you know how much I put into it? I'm like, nothing's going to happen unless you get up and do your job. Like all that is just, it's a distraction until the end. Right.
One of the things that has really amazed me, and working with Damien now on a daily basis with a company we're running together right now, and this goes, I think, to sort of the leadership demeanor, right? Is I've been doing this for a long time, running businesses. This is a new area for you. Running business is not new for you, but it's a
yeah.
new area for you. But one of the things that always blows me away is you're sort of think about how to say this delicate. This business has not always been easy, and
Yeah.
some of the dynamics that we've dealt with have been challenging, right?
Hmm.
But it's the demeanor, the calm, right? In those situations where I think a lot of people, myself included, will get really heated and, it starts to escalate. I've been on so many meetings with you where you just have that ability to kind of bring down that tension. And one day you and I were joking about it, and you sent me one of the greatest pictures I've ever seen in my entire life. And that's Damien with a beard down to here. And he said something to the effect of like, when you've negotiated around this, the rest of it is easy, right? But and this was Damien actually negotiating with Taliban warlords.
What you would say is like, man, you must have learned your negotiation skills with Taliban warlords. And I was like, well, I did. Here's a picture. Yeah. So
So,
yeah, uh,
talk
yeah.
about that. I mean, is that intentional? Like, or is that training? Or is that intentional? Or is that just your personality?
If either one of you can tell me the difference between what you think is something that was trained in you and something you've learned, I don't know. It just kind of is, right? And I'll be the first to say I've lost my cool on on plenty of meetings. But it's funny. I generally don't lose my cool with people, and the reason is that you kind of need to be the role that it needs to happen for that moment, right? Like you gotta be sensitive enough. And Greg, I've seen you do this more times than me, but sometimes we don't need a ton of people screaming, right? You might need it just to have okay, well, let's tensions there, let's bring it down a notch, right? And that's negotiation 101. Like, I mean, we're trying to get to the right outcome. We all know that. And yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time with folks in Afghanistan, trying to build trust, trying to gather information, trying to do all those types of things. And as a younger guy, I mean, it was my late 20s. I think you always just have this sort of end goal in mind. Like, is it going to be helpful if I lose my mind right now?
Mhm.
Um, and hey, look, cards on the table. Sometimes you can't help it. Like, you get
Mhm.
super angry and you're like, I've been there. And I'm just like, God, yeah, lose my, and like, then you always have to pull it back down. Okay, hold on. Like, this just, but yeah, no, it was ingrained in me over there. The consequences of being over there or higher from the physical image standpoint.
For a lot of people. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
No, it's true. It's for
yeah.
a lot of people, and we do this stuff for software and money, and it's a game in a way different. And it does affect people, but not the same way.
Yeah, and it's such a good point, Peter. Right? I mean, Damien and I have talked about this before too. Like, the parallels between military and business are really interesting to look at, right? And the the leadership characteristics, the adaptability, the resilience, kind of all the things the mental toughness we've been talking about. But there is a break point, right? I mean, I guess, Damien, there's probably a question here somewhere, but does it get overdone? Like, is there a point where, okay, but you, these are very different stakes. Stressful, yes. Anxiety provoking, yes. But very different stakes that you're dealing with. If you're talking about that sort of parallel between the kind of the military side of it going over to the business side.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there because there's been, I think, a lot said on the subject. I will be the first to admit I'm a little behind on my reading list for folks that have written books on the subject recently. I kind of tend to avoid this space as a rule, but there's probably some that I wouldn't mind perusing. I mean, I got some old friends that have gone on to write interesting books, and they've done really well. And these are friend guys that I knew well at one point, and I have a lot of respect for. And so I think what people need to realize with the military is a couple of things. One, and this goes not just for the military. I mean, look, the military style of leadership, when it's packaged and presented to the civilian world for consumption, to then integrate into your leadership style, it's done in a way where you would expect that civilian founder to pick and choose the pieces
Right.
that are relevant, right? Get up early, start your day, that kind of stuff. I mean, I know there's guys out there that do spend a lot of time on like how you begin your day, how you get organized. Like those are consistent themes, and whether it's Tony Robbins or any of these other guys that do that, there's a lot of nuggets you pull out, and then you try to incorporate those into your daily life. Where I think we get kind of sideways is when the lessons of the military are distilled down into, let's just say a combat environment, or the opposite, right? A very ethereal environment of like command and control, and you're never really down at that level. So I think when people take it too literally and they're like, okay, I'm going to try to replicate this mindset, it can be problematic. Because just remember, back at very first thing I was talking about, going from, the Navy SEALs to the service industry, like people quit.
Yeah. I'll see ya. I'm out.
Peace out, man. Like, good luck. So like, and they're like, bro, I have this huge mission tomorrow, and they're like, nah, you problem, buddy. Yeah. So I got tacos to get my friend. So you got to keep that in mind. Like there's a balancing of the humans in the environment you're in, to cultivating that sort of stuff. I mean, not to say that doesn't happen in the military. It does. It does at a much higher level. So I think, when you spend too much time focused on like, how are you going to react when someone, unloads an AK in your face? Like, that's a great question. Just make sure that you're also saying, and then what would the campaign look like that you would organize to try to accomplish this long-term goal of X, Y, or Z?
Right.
And having those sort of conversations about all of that versus it being very like act, react, right? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And I think the other thing is too, like, I know you and I have talked about this, like people aren't signing up for that. Right. So like when you're, somebody takes a job working for a software company or working for a hospitality company or something, right? That's not, I think that's where I see the parallel kind of really, because that's where it falls apart, right? It's the person's like, look, I'm here. I'm here for a 9-to-5 job. Like that's kind of what I wanted. That's what I'm going to do the best job I possibly can during those hours, but
yeah,
and
that's it.
And like,
right.
You guys know, like the best employees are the ones that like really believe in what you're doing. And they're like, I want to be part of this team. And
right.
it's a badge of honor for the do what you're doing, and your hard part is keeping it that way for them,
Right.
right? And like
Yeah.
trying to create an environment where it's still like mission driven and passion, like we've heard from other people talking
Yeah.
about like
Elon Musk
how you
do the 9 to 5 thing, but yeah, no, I agree. That's for sure.
Right.
yeah
Yeah, I look, I think, yeah, I mean, look, there's definitely a great lesson to be learned about building that culture. Look, if you can pull it off and you can create an environment where, to your point, Peter, everybody wants to be there. Um, I've seen that in great companies that I've been around. This idea that you instill in someone the belief that, like, if I don't come to work tomorrow, this whole thing's falling apart.
Mhm.
And when they believe that they're that important to the organization, that's, to me, like, that's a great leadership component that you can give someone, is believe they are so integral to this. But then you got to be around to coach that person. Like, hey, take a
yeah
week off. It's okay. Like, go get married.
yeah
Like, turn your phone off. Yeah, I've seen that too, right? Like, you have to, then people buy in too much. You're like, oh,
yeah
clear your mind. It's very good to clear your mind.
Yeah.
yeah
That parallel is a really interesting one, right? Because it's when you see the most successful companies, and Peter and I, when we do these podcasts, I mean, there's always themes that emerge, right? But and one of the things that we hear over and over, and I've experienced this firsthand, and so has Peter, and every one of our businesses, has always been the ability to instill that mission, right?
Mm.
The ability to instill the purpose that we're doing something actually for a larger purpose than showing up to
Right.
collect a paycheck. Or if you are just showing up to collect a paycheck, even that's for a higher purpose, right? Presumably. But, but from an organizational standpoint, that there is a vision to what we're trying to do together. There is a mission that we're to go try to accomplish this thing larger than ourselves. And there's a plan to go achieve it, right? And I think, at least, again, I've never been in the military, but at least, from my kind of very limited understanding of it, I mean, those things are going to be completely consistent with, and when the mission breaks down, when
Mm.
people no longer understand, you look at Vietnam or anything like that, like when nobody understands what we're doing anymore, like
Mm.
why are we fighting this thing, right?
Yeah.
Same thing happens in a business where nobody understands, like, where are we going? Why are we doing this? I don't even understand what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. That's when it really falls apart.
So well said. It's so well said. I mean, I think that's something that I've taken with me from the early days and brought forward, this idea of being part of a mission. And it's a good segue, right? Because there's a point that I hope everyone reaches. We talk a lot about, like, collecting a paycheck, being a part of something, whatever. There's a point that everyone hopefully reaches, and you hope that you reach it sooner rather than later. And then, hopefully you have the financial sort of wherewithal, or I've created a financial environment around you and your family that allows you to do this, which is, you start reorganizing your priorities of, like, where and why you're going to work on something, right?
Mhm.
And money starts to drop, like, you know, and I don't mean that in a, like, oh, when you get super rich, it's not at all. I think it's creating and knowing the importance of, like, these are the things that matter to me in my life. Like, one, I want to, I want to be around for my kids. I want to know what's going on. I want to be an active parent. There's a component there, right? And hopefully people that have children, to the best of their ability, do that. I know my dad did, and it was great, so, and then you start thinking about, like, what don't I want to, what I'm doing to matter, and I think back to, as I was beginning of this, talking a lot about what we did at Sagamore in Kevin Plank's Family Office world. Everything we did started to really be focused on it had to matter. And I would have, I didn't keep I didn't, it was, money's nice and all that, but when you start to believe in this mission, like what we're doing as an actual purpose, it's just, it's so powerful. And then, of course, last but not least, you really got to love the people you're around, right? And so if you create this environment of, everyone's bonded together, we're all sharing this common purpose, this common goal, it allows to have those connections, which are great. And when I met Greg the first time, and I hadn't seen Jason or another gentleman, our mutual friend, in a while, And we all kind of said at the same time, like, we're at the point where we just want to work with people we like. You know what I mean? And so, I would just say, like, get to that part quick because, focusing on the paycheck, yeah, just change your lifestyle, you know? Like, yeah, so,
I found like the exhaust of you doing things like with people you like that you want to do is the money comes back in the outcome of that, right? Instead of focusing on that, if you
yeah,
focus on doing what you know, what you really love to do with people you love to do it with, the it's just the exhaust of it.
That's the perspective shift, right? That I think it's unfortunate. Like there are lessons I think you learn later in life. I'm 50,
Yeah.
Damien's
yeah,
47, like you said, Peter's like 73, 74, I think. Um,
lady.
not a show goes 80, not a show goes by where Peter doesn't get insulted about his age. I think he's
Yeah,
like 3 months older than me, but just
3 years, maybe.
that's right. But I think, it's one of those things that I think it's one of those unfortunate realities that it takes way too long to learn that lesson, right?
Yeah.
We spend all of these years kind of building things that, in a way that's not particularly satisfying, right? And then you get to a point and it's like, oh, I want to spend my other years kind of doing this. I think the earlier that you can learn that lesson, right? The earlier where you can find the real meaning and what it is that you're actually trying to build, I think is something that I know it took me way too long to learn that.
learn it fast enough. So you're always going to say it took too long because you
Right.
can't learn it fast enough, right? And
Yep.
so you just got to remind people that get to that part because
You got to be patient too, with yourself. Like you got to go through a journey to get there,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
You can't have perspective from not doing anything,
yeah,
you know?
that's
So
fair.
in our final couple minutes here, Damian, what's next for you? I know you and I are doing the next thing right now, which is we're working on a mutual portfolio company that we have called Conquer, which is in the sales enablement space.
Why don't you guys explain what an operating partner is? Because some people listening to this may not know what that is.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we're still trying to figure it out. I don't know, Damian, what are we doing? Do you have an idea what we're doing?
Yeah, so look, I think that a lot of private equity firms out there start to bring on partners that they call operating partners, and the distinction between, let's just say like a general partner or someone who's on the purely investment side versus operating is they would expect that operating partner to have operating experience, right? So we come in as more of, hey, I'm not going to really ask you to do tons of diligence or assembling a deal and getting into the nitty gritty on how we find source a deal or diligence it or maybe even deploy capital or price it. But what I would love for you to do is to dive in, maybe sort of pre acquisition and go, okay, what do you think? Get under the hood, check nuts and bolts, make sure that give us an assessment of how the thing's running, and then of course after the fact, sometimes you get parachuted in to just really spend a lot of time there, kind of doing some of the doing, right, like the hands-on shifting inside of organization. And Greg and I have been fortunate enough to be doing a lot of that now. And but it's also we've got a lot of there's a changing macro environment around us. We're pivoting for that. It's there's a lot of factors going. It's not necessarily always uh, like
Yeah.
company driven. I mean, you pivot to other stuff. So operating partners, just that, right? Like you are ready to operate inside the business or pontificate on how that business is operating versus purely investment.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I think a lot of people don't understand that that's a role out there.
Yeah, well, neither did Greg and I. So this is gift.
You get deployed.
We got
Um,
paid. We got a lot of so,
So, and Demi, I mean, that's where you're spending your time these days. I know with me on, working on Conquer as well as some other interesting stuff that you've got going on as well within and also outside of Camden Partners, which is the private equity firm that both you and I are associated with.
that's right. Yeah. That was a question there, but I tell you, that's it, and we're enjoying it. I mean, I think there's a little sprinkling of projects that I'm finding that the unique skill set of former Navy SEAL, current investment specialist is I'm sort of bubbling up to starting to see. Probably too early to talk about on this podcast, but you know what they are. So maybe in like 4 months, we'll have another podcast of like, all right, so how'd that happen? What you gonna? Yeah,
That'll be an interesting follow-up to this one pretty soon.
yeah.
Damian, how do people get in contact with you? Somebody wants to connect with you, outside of the podcast, kind of standard stuff, LinkedIn and stuff like that.
Yeah, LinkedIn. I just finally updated my profile after being berated.
I noticed that, by the way. I noticed that this morning when I was getting ready for the podcast.
Yeah. Now here's the one thing I learned this. One of the companies I'm working with, I had to actually testify multiple times to get cross-examined. Super fun. So I was getting cross-examined by the United States Trustee's office, and they were asking me all these off-the-wall questions about my LinkedIn profile and if I still worked here. And I realized that when I went home and Googled my name, I just take my name and punch it into Google. Like the first 2 hits are like old cached things that are completely irrelevant. So, and the number one was like the wrong LinkedIn profile. So if you find a LinkedIn profile with no pictures and 2 people following me, it's not the right one, even though it's the first hit in Google. So keep looking. I'm in there. See my smiling face. I've got a great AI generated photo. No, I'm just joking. You'll see my face in the photo. It talks about what I'm really doing with Camden Partners, with Tessame, with Conquer, with a few other groups. So that's the best way. And yeah, love to chit chat. I'm always up for, if you're in my area, I do consume beers from time to time. So if you're interesting enough, I don't know, send me something. We'll grab a beer in Boulder, Colorado. And we always chit chat on the phone or Zoom or one of these other many ways that we can connect as humans nowadays virtually.
Great. Yeah, Damian, this was a great, it's a great time. Really appreciate you telling the story. I think it's, it's one that this is just a different perspective than, I think there's a lot of the kind of the romanticism of this stuff that's out there. And I think this is a really just, interesting story to tell that, it's just infinitely fascinating, I think, for people on the kind of that have never been in this world, because there are so many ideas of what it is and those parallels. I think this is a really interesting one. So appreciate you being on the podcast, and I look forward to doing it again.
Can't wait, my friends. Great seeing you, Greg. Peter, as always.
Yep.
Enjoy.
Talk soon. Cheers.
Cheers.